Hey everyone, welcome back to Module 12's micro lecture on food politics. As many of you probably know, food politics and food policy in the food system is a very hotly contested topic. Today we're going to be covering two different ideas. One is related to social change and how policy fits within that. And then secondly, we're going to be talking just about kind of the Farm Bill, Farm Bill 101 in terms of the basics of what's in the Farm Bill and some suggestions on how to improve that. So food policy change can be slow and sometimes painful and sometimes full of contradictions. Yet we know that policy and policy change can actually happen quite quickly, particularly when responding to a crisis in the food system. So, for example, the Farm Bill was the result of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. So, even though policies in the food system can be frustrating, there's also a lot of potential, and we know that sometimes it can be slow, but it can also happen quite quickly. So I wanted to start this micro lecture off talking a little bit about social change in general. We're going to be talking specifically about policy, but within the social sciences, there's a lot of attention paid to change and how change comes about, and we certainly know that policy and politics is a part of that. But I did want to kind of introduce you to some ideas and some other ways that change comes about. So we know that change can come about from the individual level. In the food system, we talk a lot about purchasing power and voting with your dollar in terms of how we spend our food dollars. In this class, we've talked also about not privatizing the troubles that are in the food system to the individual level. So I want to make sure that's clear. But individuals do have power at the individual level in the choices that they make in food and in buying food to some extent. In some groups have some power there. The interaction level. So this is the idea that we have, there is change that can come from the groups that we're a part of and the organizations that we're part of, the people that we're interacting with and the conversations that we're having. Certainly, we know that that grassroots level, kind of grassroots change comes from the interaction level and even collective action, which I'll talk about in a second. Institutional and policy levels. So this has to do really with institutions and the government in terms of what policies are written and enacted, and then how that influences the social behavior, how we behave, what we consume, how we consume it with regard to food specifically. And then here we have level of collective action, and it's not at the top for any specific reason, but this has to do with reform and transformation happening through the public and public protests, for example, and strikes, boycotts, public demonstrations, and things of that nature to bring about policy change and change in general. So I wanted to situate how policy definitely, we know, in a very big way, particularly with regard to the food system and how the food system is shaped, is absolutely and fundamentally shaped by things like the Farm Bill. There are, however, other levels in which change does occur and can happen. So specifically related to policy as well, we know that there is policy at the federal government as well as state, and then also through local and regional, at the local and regional level. So in your reading this week, you know that there's a beautiful table that is listed in terms of the different segments of the food system, and then how change and policy influences the food system at these various levels. So let's talk specifically about the Farm Bill. I think the Farm Bill in some ways is this kind of like beautiful beast of legislation, which is really packed. It is a very large It is a very large, broad piece of legislation, and it is the most substantial piece shaping the food system. And so the Farm Bill, generally speaking, is a piece of legislation that is passed every 5 years that governs federal farm, food, and conservation policies. And this is stemming from Roosevelt's New Deal in the 30s. And it covers a wide array of topics. It is an omnibus bill covering multiple and some would argue unrelated topics, all within one spending bill. So it covers spending for SNAP and research and public agricultural programs, food safety, economic development in rural areas, conservation in soil, river, and forest, and government support in terms of subsidies and insurance. So it is a very, very large spending bill, and also covers a multitude of programs. So it funds the USDA and SNAP and crop insurance and wastewater treatment programs. The U.S. agricultural policy actually has its roots from the Lincoln administration, which actually created the United States Department of Agriculture along with the Homestead Act, and also passed legislation for land grant institutions. So here I wanted to show you just a quick infographic of the Farm Bill spending. So this is from 2019 to 2023. And we can see in here that nutrition spending is the largest piece of this bill. And then we have crop insurance, commodities, conservation, and then trade. And this nutrition piece is certainly, when talking about public health, is of particular interest when thinking about how to best use these funds and to bring about the healthiest population possible. Many argue that perhaps the nutrition bill or nutrition program should not be also situated with other bills that are related to government support in terms of agriculture. In terms of like crop insurance, for example, that maybe the bill would be the healthiest if all these programs were not situated in one bill. But nonetheless, around $100 million a year are dedicated to going into this, into the farm bill spending. So it is a very large program. So one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention was from the Paulberg reading, and this is from the food politics reading in terms of farm subsidies and trade. And there's a lot in there in this kind of question and answer style, but I wanted to bring just a couple of highlights to your attention. So it's in Paulberg writes that farm productivity, the average share of the American income on food has actually decreased from about 41% a century ago to around 10% today. So also by 1995, 90% of farm commodities came from farms around 1,800 acres in size and around $600,000 in net worth. In the United States, 7% of farms receive around 45% of all agricultural subsidies. And then one of the things that Paulberg writes about and really problematizes is this, the concept of the iron triangle within policymaking. So policymaking relationships between congressional committees really having a strong hold on how policies are shaped, particularly the Farm Bill, for example. And that there's this nexus between the government lobbying and money for elections, and this coalescing kind of relationships that really keep shaping the Farm Bill. Maybe the outcome is not the best for public interests and ends up being a little bit. It ends up being more of a financial gain for some groups versus having the public interest at the forefront of a lot of those programs. So the Iron Triangle is the congressional, so the House and Senate Agricultural Committee, executive in terms of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and then the private sector here with farm lobbying organizations like the Farm Bureau. Now, this is one perspective from the literature, and it's just that in terms of farm subsidies and trade and how the politics are playing out in the Farm Bill as it relates to subsidies and trade. So again, while there are a lot of things to improve, or one could argue there's a lot to improve in the Farm Bill, there's also an argument that if we scale up many of the programs that are in the Farm Bill, that also could have a very large impact on the health of the food system, both the people and the environment. So this is from the Union for Concerned Scientists that wrote a policy brief on scaling up different programs within the Farm Bill. And the brief is called A Farm Bill for Good Food. And it's included in the links in the module. And I'm not going to go through necessarily each of the programs, but what I did want to highlight for you is the categories included. Now, many more categories could be added here to make a sustainable food system for all. But the ones that they've included in the policy brief include strengthening regional food systems and local economies, supporting sustainable agriculture, advancing racial equity and fair labor practices, and then also improving animal welfare. Now, already from this class, each of you have talked and touched upon many of the problems and also ways to improve these various aspects within the food system and that are present in the Farm Bill. So nonetheless, there are a lot of weaknesses and a lot of critiques that have been placed on the Farm Bill and the way that politics plays out in policy making, unfortunately. But there's also a lot of room for improvement, and there's a lot of good programs that could be invested in more to create an even more sustainable and just food system. So there is a lot to be optimistic about within that bill.